Hi, Celia.
Sorry about that. Hello.
What time is
How
it
are
over
you?
there?
9 o'clock at night.
Nice. No
We're
rest
go-
for the wicked.
Actually, no, it's 8 o'clock at night, and we're going out to dinner in an hour because that's
Wow.
when they eat. Yes.
What's going on? You're at the Agripreneur Summit, I see.
I'm at the Global Agripreneur Summit in Thessaloniki, which is part of the Thessaloniki International Fair, which annually gets about 260,000 visitors.
Wow.
And this is part of the Future Agro Challenge. So it's agripreneurs from all over the world that have been presenting. It's showcasing Greece because it's in Greece. Last year it was in Istanbul, or it was in Turkey. The year before that it was in South Africa. And so my friend Carla is kind of the ringleader, and so she's putting together an initiative and asked if I would come and help facilitate a workshop of impact makers to use the ESHIP goals as a framework to create an ecosystem around Future Agro Challenge.
Beautiful.
So yeah, so that's the whole thing. Hey Dia.
Hi, Dia. Hi, Jess.
Hi Jess. How are you?
Grab something to write with.
No, okay. Yeah, it's not my show, so hello.
Celia, how are you? I've been
I'm
seeing
good. How
your
are you?
posts on LinkedIn and Facebook. It looks awesome.
Oh my gosh, these people are amazing. And sometimes, I mean, some of these people have like these really big solutions for things. Hi, Katie. Um, so we're talking about things that impact, like there's a grain storage monitor so that people who have grains don't lose because of the moisture and the temperatures to lose their product. So there's a guy who's Greek who's incorporated in Ventura, California, because people do that, and he's helping farmers in Nebraska. So I learned about the process in which sea salt is harvested in Mozambique, and just like really cool, interesting stuff. So, cool. Yeah, and then running into people that I kind of know from other people. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
I'll
it's,
definitely have to follow up with you later because in ADA we have a water tech focus, and I feel there's a lot of overlap between the green tech and water. So I'd love to follow up with you.
oh yeah, there's all kinds of water. So I mean, it's agriculture, and we don't have anything that does that. So that's why they want to create the community around Future Agro Challenge and include the United States. In fact, the U.S. Embassy is helping to sponsor this event.
Okay,
So
that's
I wish we had more. We have people that represent the United States, but they're like Serbians who incorporated in Silicon Valley, and
so.
and yeah.
Is there much from the Midwest region? Hmm.
No,
We should be. We
no,
should
we
be
should
there.
be. And who else? Yeah, it's just a whole lot of stuff. So yeah. Hey Scott, there's a whole bunch of data geeks over here taking all kinds of data measurements of farming, and so really interesting. So I'm going to put myself on mute. I'm going to leave the call just a little bit early, but I'm going to put myself on mute and let Beth run the show. Is that who's doing that, or Katie? So
Thank you, Celia. Yeah, Katie and I and Hassan let me know this morning he was going to be a little bit late. So I'm going to go ahead, and I just shared in the chat. Can everybody see the link to the agenda document? You don't necessarily need to open it, but we're going to follow that. And we're so excited to see you all here on this new goal call cadence with this meetup today. So welcome. And if you don't mind, we'll go ahead and start with some introductions. I'm Beth Zimmer. I am co-founder of the Innovation Collaborative. We're an ecosystem builder organization for Northwestern Pennsylvania, and I reside in Erie, Pennsylvania. And we can go ahead and popcorn over to Jess, if you wouldn't mind a quick intro, and then popcorn to someone else.
Sorry, did you say Jess? Me? Okay, yeah. Hi, Beth. Nice to see you again. We met at the conference this last spring. Hi, everyone. This is Jess Edwards, and I'm Director of Outreach with Alaska Ocean Cluster in Anchorage, Alaska. Nice to chat with everyone today. I will popcorn over to Laura.
Hi, I'm Laura Good. And Jess, I think I met you at the ESHIP Summit.
Yep, we did. Yeah, nice to see you.
So I'm from Sacramento in Northern California, and Jeff Bennett and I run a nonprofit called Startup SAC. We're focused on working with very early stage startups. And I will popcorn to Scott.
Hi, Scott Resnick in Madison, Wisconsin. My background is as a founder and entrepreneur, also very involved in the Starting Block, which is a startup ecosystem organization in Madison, Wisconsin. I will popcorn over to Kate, who I believe is actually inside Starting Block, given the conference room she's speaking at.
I am. Hey, everybody. I'm Katie Stanton. I am Program Director for a national organization called the Urban Manufacturing Alliance, but I am, in fact, in the same building as Scott. We should have coordinated here in Madison. And I'm also an ESHIP champion alongside Beth, and she and I have been working on this goal for almost a year now, so it's pretty great. And I will popcorn to Dia.
Hi, I'm Dia. I'm in Ada, Oklahoma. I work with our economic development organization, Ada Jobs Foundation. And let's see, Celia.
Okay. Hi, I'm Cecilia Wessinger. I'm your ESHIP community activator, focused on the entrepreneurial ecosystem building practitioners, as all of you are, working in your own custom and bespoke ways, as Andy likes to put it. And I will popcorn over to whoever has the 813 phone number.
That's me, I think, or I'm 831. This is Brian Pfeiffer with Small Business Majority. We're a national small business education and advocacy organization based in Northern California, where I am, and also offices in DC, Colorado, and Illinois. And I will popcorn over to the 813 number if I stepped on their toes. I can't see them.
No, that was me being dyslexic.
I don't think there is an 813. Is that everybody?
Yeah, I think so.
One thing I forgot to do, I guess I do need to ask you to check out the agenda in the chat. Could one or two people please volunteer? If you go down to the second page, if we could have a couple of volunteers to take some notes and act as a scribe, that would be awesome.
Doesn't have to be anything fancy, just kind of what we talk about here in bullet form. Oh, thanks, Laura.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. All right.
So back to the agenda.
Yeah,
Okay,
should we?
and just so you know, I'm going to probably leave early, but hopefully I'll be able to turn the host over to you, so that when I check out, I can actually leave the recording on so that you guys can get done. We're having dinner in about 45 minutes, and it's now 8:15 in Greece, so I'm just gonna check out just a little bit early. Okay.
Thank you. So Celia, before you do that, would you mind, I don't know how familiar everyone is to this new cadence. Would you kind of give that general 3,000-foot view of what's happening these days?
Sure, and then after I do that, I'm going to turn it over to Tyler to introduce himself. So as Beth and Katie mentioned, and some of you have been on the calls, like Dia, who've been checking in on the calls and working on these goals for a long time. You know, what we wanted to do was, as we move from the design to the deliver year, what we wanted to do was be able to work on those projects that people are interested in. Let me just share with you that those project canvases that you worked on at the ESHIP Summit, while there is no expectation of you forming a project team, continuing with the people that you talk to, if your energy is drawn to doing that, we really do invite you to get together with those people and form a project team and start working on those projects. The point of these calls is kind of a monthly check-in, and in hopes that we can create more visibility and alignment under the projects that are being formed. The idea of the visibility and alignment is that we don't operate in silos. We work to collaborate and work in tandem with each other. There is no expectation to have to collaborate, but it's so to give an example of a project that formed, as we were talking about storytelling being something that falls within some of these ESHIP goals, then Tyler, Jeff, and Avery got together. They said, we want to create an ecosystem builder repository. They created EB Hub, which is now an LLC, and they're working on that initiative. If you see somebody who's working on an initiative that you're interested in, reach out, form a project team, and collaborate. So the calls in this format are basically the beginning of the call to do a little bit of check-in and catch people up on what's going on. Then there'll be some kind of peer learning that's created and curated by yourselves. What do you want to know? Who do you want to learn from? Things like that. How can we get better at this and improve the idea of universal support? Katie and Beth have been working on a couple of initiatives. I'm sure they'll share. And then have a discussion and think about the things that we can only do together, right? So these calls are about setting up a situation where you foster the relationships in the community to better collaborate and coordinate and show more visibility, and then how we can work together and learn from each other. So is that basically it? Did I leave anything out? Okay, I'm gonna let Tyler just briefly introduce himself before he turns it back to Beth.
Hi everybody, I'm Tyler, Daytona Beach, Florida.
You muted yourself, Tyler.
Sorry, hands up, I won't touch it. Daytona Beach, Florida, ecosystem builder hub.com, working on the storytelling initiative and contributing where I can on goal 4. So here to listen in on what you guys are up to, so we make sure we catch all the right stories, and however I can contribute. So hi, and back to Beth.
Hi, Tyler. Thanks for being here. It's great to see this group. So next on the agenda, we're to take 10-15 minutes and just talk about updates and what's been happening within Goal 6, Universal Support. So if you're looking at the agenda, you can see project team updates are next, and it's 2 to 3 minute updates from each project team. So I'll tell you right now, there are 2 project teams in place and growing. That would be project team around 6.2, the Global Awareness Campaign, which, as Tyler knows and Katie, that 6.2 is very relevant for our storytelling project team as well. And then 6.5, also relevant to storytelling, is how do we activate local foundations in support of entrepreneurship. So I'm going to give you an update on the Global Awareness Campaign and ask Katie and Tyler and anyone else that's on that might have been engaged to fill in some blanks or fill in things that I might miss. and just note that there are not formal project teams yet formed around 6.1, 6.3, or 6.4. So the global awareness campaign just last week kind of gelled the project team around developing public relations campaigns that help to educate communities and aspiring entrepreneurs as to what entrepreneurship is, why it's important to our communities, to our regions, to our country, to our world, and to educate people with ideas that there are resources in each community that exist at least in part, if not in full, to help them take their idea to market or to help support their fast failure. So I've experienced community transformation from a cultural perspective here in our region by doing just this. We spent some significant resources over 3 years to put together a marketing strategy and implement that strategy across the community. And today, back in 2015, there was not much talk about entrepreneurship or startups being important. And today, there are new programs and opportunities popping up all over the place for entrepreneurship and community leadership, elected officials, universities, businesses are all talking about entrepreneurship as being extremely important for the vibrancy of our community's future. So the call last week was kind of an introductory call to just confirm what this really means to the ESHIP goal number 6, and to confirm that we all wanted to be a part of this and work on it together. And my ultimate goal is that we create this awesome global campaign that is as effective as, I don't know how old all of you are, but some of you might remember the federal government's Your Brain on Drugs campaign, or You've Got Milk campaigns that were very effective and even the anti-tobacco campaigns, right? Very effective in changing the cultural landscape of our country. And I think really big, and I think we could just get a bunch of resources together and let's go do this across the country, if not across the globe. And luckily there's a few more sane people on the call last week and have suggested that let's first step back, start talking to ecosystem builders across the country and ask them, has your community or region experienced success in gaining support for entrepreneurial ecosystem building in this way, by creating a public relations campaign and going out and hitting all the media channels and having events and so forth to teach people why this is an important part of our economic development strategy and our community development strategy. So we pretty much came to consensus that we're going to do that discovery process first, and also start, once we do find those folks that have had success with this type of thing, in addition to Erie, we're going to ask to have them highlighted across the community, and even ultimately do customer discovery and talk to some national resource providers. The national resource providers are the folks that, like Katie's organization, that provide resources to entrepreneurial ecosystem builders across the country. Test our ideas with them, show them the evidence that this works, and see what kind of support we might be able to garner to running some more pilots in communities across the country. I'm going to stop. I said a lot, and I'm going to look to Katie and Tyler and anyone else that wants to jump in to fill in things I might have missed, and also to open it up for questions.
Yeah, before questions, I'll just add something that we talked about on the 6.2 call, was creating some sort of toolkit that people that, city governments or places like Starting Block could use to implement sort of the global awareness campaign on their local level, thinking about something we could do maybe to take a smaller step towards that larger global campaign.
So I wanted to add that, and I'm going to take my ESHIP community activator hat off for a second and highlight Scott Resnick and the work and the knowledge that he comes with in dealing with local government, because I think he has a very unique perspective. So I'm going to put him on the spot because I can, and then he can get me back when I see him next week. But that basically the idea of connecting with your local government really needs a lens of somebody who's had that experience, and we have, thankfully, somebody who has. So Scott and I are on the metrics team at Startup Champions, and we just talked about this last week. So Scott, will you share some of the things and that insight?
Yeah, awesome job putting me on the spot. And if I was also in Greece, I would absolutely be putting other people on the spot. But yeah, so just very briefly, my background is slightly atypical to most ecosystem builders. I served in public office from 2011 to 2015. So I had the opportunity to work hand in hand with many of the foundational leaders in our community, major corporations in the Madison area, as well as stakeholders in the local government where I served, as well as the state government. So from the perspective of how do you cross that bridge into policy making, or even further into the large tectonic organizations that actually matter quite a bit for fundraising around entrepreneurship. So that is the development community in real estate and property development, the banking and financial communities, as well as the government, the government as a whole. Creating and crafting messages that speak to those populations, and how do you build trust along those lines? So that is what I've been working on for the last few years.
Yeah, and I love that, because it's sort of, as Beth was giving that recap of 6.2, it reminded me, 6.1 around making the case, make the case messaging templates, like that is sort of just a direct outcome of the global awareness campaign, or it's almost like a precursor to it. And Scott, I think what you just described could be, really helpful with your experience in that project team as well. Any questions about what we've done so far? I can give a brief description of 6.5. Cool. I'll just say before I go to 6.5, 6.3, Celia, you had talked about this before, but this is sort of happening organically with the existing conferences and building an ecosystem building. Like Scott just hosted a conference a couple weeks ago as part of Forward Fest, which is a big entrepreneurial ecosystem building event here in Madison. And there was a panel about ecosystem building. I know TomTom Fest is doing it. So as we're thinking about, as this group is continuing to meet, maybe as we hear about those, we can just let each other know, and then maybe there's a way to lift that up for the entire community, rather than having like a specific project team, or maybe it's just a small one, or an outgrowth of this group in general.
Yeah, and I'll add also that Eric Renz Whitmore has put in a proposal to South by Southwest to have a panel around ecosystem building, which would be extremely cool.
Great. Yeah. And I know Forward Cities, at the Forward Cities conference, they did a little bit of it too. I presented on it myself. So it's happening.
So let me just share with you that as I mentioned briefly, the project canvases that were created at the ESHIP Summit will be shared this week, is my hope. Now you have to remember, it's like foundation time, so foundation times work a little bit slower than most like conventional flocks. So when I say this week, we're hoping by the end of the week that you will get an email. If you put your name in that says, I want to lead, count me in, or keep me in the loop, you will get an email that has all of the contact information of all of the people that were interested in all of the projects. The canvases themselves, without any contact information, will be uploaded as pictures or album and into Facebook, as well as the Slack channel. The reason, or this the dashboard that we're using, and if somebody can kind of link the dashboard into the chat so that everyone knows kind of what we're talking about. The idea is that we wanted to be very mindful of the fact that those people who signed up to raise their hands, they trusted us with their contact information. we wanted to be able to share that information in a mindful way. And so the people that are involved in Facebook are semi-involved, right? Not all of them have been to the summit. They're generally interested in ecosystem building. We've met some, we've not met some, things like that. And so we don't necessarily want that. And the dashboard itself is actually a searchable site that's live on a Google page. So we don't want your contact information floating around. That's why you will get an email if you've asked to be kept in the loop and all of those things. But the canvases themselves will be shared, dashboard and Facebook, and then the contact information will be shared in a one-time email that goes out to the community of the people who signed up. Does that make sense, or is there any questions on that? Okay, back to you.
Awesome. I'll just give a quick rundown on 6.5. So this is around activating local foundation and other funders in support of entrepreneurship and also entrepreneurial ecosystem building. So I come at this from an organization that does a lot of ecosystem building sort of as a side project to my normal job. So I might get paid for a piece of research or to do an event, but I see part of the process of developing that as growing an ecosystem around that work. And we're a membership organization, so we're sort of built into this ecosystem building model, but I'm never sort of explicitly funded for that work. So we're trying to find a way to sort of convince funders, including a lot of local and national foundations, that this is a sort of a valued and valuable piece of work that they should be funding. So right now we're sort of in the fact-finding phase. So we're doing research on funders that are supporting either ecosystem building as a whole or functions of the ecosystem building process. And we want to sort of take that, and this is where we overlap with storytelling, and we want to sort of build these successful case studies that we can share with other funders in order to sort of make the case. And then we're also researching places like regions or cities that are acting as conveners or facilitators, or they're just monitoring the health of the ecosystem. So as we're doing this research as a smaller project team, if you all have other examples of where that might be happening, like Scott, maybe you and I should touch base about Madison, we would love to hear them so that we can connect with them and understand them better. Beth, did I miss anything there?
No, I don't think so. We're for both 6.2 and 6.5 and all of the projects initiatives, we are looking for more folks to jump on and be members of the project teams if you're interested. But also, like Katie said, if you could please just let us know if you know of folks that A, have had some successful media traction with their ecosystem building work, and B, help us with understanding the pieces and parts of the ecosystem that are being funded by local foundations and other funders. And we kind of view the Holy Grail as, if a foundation and government and other community funders are funding the actual backbone support organization for the ecosystem. And what I mean by that is, are they funding the organization that monitors the health of the ecosystem and acts as a convener and a facilitator for all the actors in the ecosystem, so that, for example, we can all go to funders together to say, we agree, we're the entrepreneurial ecosystem actors, and we all agree that we need support, funding, and other resources to execute on this particular gap in the ecosystem, versus all of us individually in the ecosystem going to each funder with our singular asks. So hopefully that all makes sense. And if you're drawn to any of these initiatives, please reach out and let us know. If you're going to start a project team, that'd be great, on an initiative that hasn't gotten legs yet.
Yeah, and to that end, we want to make sure we answer any of your questions. So if you guys have any questions about what Beth and I have been working on, or more generally while we still have Celia before she leaves for dinner, now would be a great time to ask.
Sure. Jess Edwards here. I just have a quick question. So I was on the storytelling goal as well call, and because there is crossover, my question is, are the organizers of the calls sharing the content and the ideas? Because I submitted to Jeff Bennett on the storytelling, but I don't know if it works better for this group or that group. So I just wanted to know if you're all sharing so that there's no duplication or it goes where it's supposed to go. That's my question.
I can answer on Jeff's behalf that yeah, we are as ecosystem builder hub, Jeff's role, my role, and what we're doing to try and help to just kind of give a place to post stuff that needs help, as well as organize storytelling efforts and initiatives, either for individuals or for towns. Jess, thank you for your submission. We are sharing them in terms of the champions group. We've kind of been kicking them back and forth, like, hey, you should talk to this person too, at least on the leads. But right now, as people are beginning to step up and go, yeah, anytime you think it would connect directly to one particular initiative or goal as a whole, then you should try and at least reach out to whoever's identified themselves as being, you know, the champion or captain of that area. Katie,
Okay,
Beth,
thanks
you
so
want to add to
much.
that?
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
I think it goes back to also what Celia was saying earlier. Is she still with us? I don't see her.
Yep.
Whereas they're
Well,
taking some time to be very mindful about how they communicate everything that came out of the ESHIP summit. So we should see more information about who signed up for what and the interest levels in each area coming out towards later this week.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions before we move on the agenda?
I know that we're working on the beta and the cleaning stuff up, but I seem to be looking at a goal 6 page where the order of the initiatives is a little, it might have been the original before it got redone. So I'll just bring that to your attention. I might be looking at the wrong link. It's been known to happen.
Yeah. I think the one we're looking at is the goal meetup agenda. I don't know
Yeah.
if it's in
No,
your chat.
I was just over on the beta dashboard, just trying to track down to see all the numbers again. And then as you were reading them out, I'm like, that doesn't match, you know, so
Okay.
anyway.
Yeah. It looks like Celia might be frozen, so I don't know if she's with us or not, but I will.
Hopefully she's gone and she can
I
just
am.
go have fun.
I'm not. I'm still here. I'm waiting for them to be done with their demo day. The initiatives were taken from what's mirrored in the Kaufman page is what's mirrored on the dashboard. So, so I guess Beth and Katie and I can sync up and make sure that we've got the goals in the order that they were presented. Because what we want to do is make sure that as we talk about those goals, maybe for a while, like talk about the titles as opposed to the numbers, so we know which initiative content we're talking about. Does that make sense? But I will double check since I am several hours ahead, that when I get back online, I'll make sure that the numbers all sync up to the initiatives and the Kaufman page that's on .org and the dashboard, which is kind of outside of Kaufman's purview. The reason that the dashboard lives outside of Kaufman's purview is, first of all, to remember that this is the ESHIP community effort in ecosystem building and not the Kaufman ESHIP initiatives. So while Kaufman is the holder of some of these efforts, the idea is that it is by the community, of the community, for the community. And so we wanted to be able to give people information without having to go through channels that you have to go through when it's on a .org. There will be a Kaufman ESHIP goals site that's very similar to the dashboard and mirrors probably more the UN Sustainable Goals website. So it informs the general community at large. The dashboard itself is probably is really geared towards you, the ecosystem building practitioners who are really working and thinking about it. So the ones who get on the calls, you need to know what's going on out there within the community so that you can better align and coordinate, right? It's not everybody wanting to do that. And when they do, then they'll jump on the dashboard. And that's the goal and the hope, is that this is a working page and not like to present to the world. Does that make sense? Okay. And then if you're putting it on the Google Docs, Laura, I'm trying to follow. So what you're going to do is you're going to put them on the Google Doc, and then when the call's over, I upload these calls to the dashboard, and then what'll happen is we'll take those notes that you put on the Google Doc and we'll move them down so there's a running agenda and notes of each call. Does that make sense? So I'm back on mute.
Great. Thanks, Celia. So let's move to the next part of the agenda, Beth, if that's okay with you. Cool. So we just had a couple of questions for you and love your feedback. So in the future, this section might be, a panel discussion, or we have a presenter. But today we're just going to have a little conversation and maybe do some brainstorming around that. But we're curious, from what you've heard so far from mostly Beth and I, and a little bit Celia, how do you see these initiatives sort of moving the field forward, the field of entrepreneurial ecosystem building forward? And then, of course, like, what topics or content would you find most valuable to support what we're working on, if that makes sense?
This is a quiet group. Come on, Tyler, you've got an idea.
I was just gonna say I apologize, but I gotta jump off early. No, this is awesome. You guys have good stuff. Kate, I don't want to interrupt that. I'll reach out later about our stuff that we need to talk about. And Scott, can't wait to see what Madison has for us at SCN. So, Celia, go have fun. Do something. Bye, everyone. Sorry.
Tyler, thank you.
Yeah, Beth just retyped the question in the chat too. How do you see this goal moving the field forward? So this goal of universal support, maybe that's a good place to start.
So I attended the ESHIP conference this year, and I was still kind of getting up to date on the things we're doing. But I just think it's good to have the collaboration between the storytelling and universal support. So I'm glad that some of the people who jumped on today. So I think we definitely need to continue that. And I haven't been a part of a call where we had any guest speaker or information sharing, but I'm in support for that. I think that would be great.
Let me ask you, I'm going to pose a question because I'm still on the call. Dia, you hosted an entrepreneurial summit in your community. How did you get the people involved or interested in talking about these things, right? Because the idea is to move along the conversation about ecosystem building. And so when you were trying to engage in your community, what was your biggest hurdle and who was your greatest advocate? And like, what roles did they play?
Yeah, that's a good question. So this was second year that we did it. And, first year was more about information sharing, and we saw a lot of people in the audience who were not necessarily business owners or entrepreneurs, but we had students and we had creatives, and we also had we had city council members attend, which was really good. So we work on them with them on a daily basis, which helps us being in an economic development organization. So I think the biggest hurdle was kind of getting a more focused group. But at the same time, we realized that that was actually helping us because it was just spreading the message in the community in a word that they understand better than us. So we had a little brainstorming session the afternoon before the summit, and we invited like the lawyers, bankers, accountants, and other people who just wanted to be champions for entrepreneurship. And I think that brainstorming session was really helpful because we took the notes and sent it back to everybody else who wanted to follow up. And our hope is that we can have another event to kind of follow up with those who are already on board with this idea and want to support it. So that's kind of how we went about it.
Okay, and I'm going to pick on Scott all I can. But I do promise, Scott, to let people know that as much as I'm enjoying being in Greece, that I cannot wait to get to Madison. So there's your plug. So as you get
How
ready,
about this? We can switch spots. I can go to Greece. You can hang out in Madison.
Yeah, I'm there
Right.
too.
Okay.
Totally.
No, because what you don't know is that Scott was on vacation at the Azores a month ago. So no, don't feel bad for him, okay, at all. So Scott, as you're getting ready to host the Madison Startup Champions Network, what was your biggest hurdle, and who did you have to convince, and who was your biggest advocate?
Oh, so I may actually go backwards a little bit. That's a great question. And really, when hearing someone putting on their second startup summit, so we've now in Madison been working on this for about 10 years. So Forward Fest just celebrated its 10th year, which is our large community multi-day startup festival. And our first interaction was what we called which was the Forward Fest conference, which was just sort of a one-day summit of entrepreneurs, which later grew into 40 plus events 10 years later. So early on, it was, we had a very little traction from anyone outside of the entrepreneurial community. So entrepreneurship was a bit of a foreign subject, and certainly not from the larger government agents, trusts, banks, or other service providers. So it took a lot of time, but a lot of relationship building to show that this is a model that can stem future successes. What I would say is we kept it very lean and very focused for a number of years before creating that outward network. And we made it as inclusive as possible. So focusing on anyone who is a startup that we sort of identified as a high growth potential startup. And some of those startups may look differently than others, or their focus area was different, but making sure that they had a spot at the table, everything from someone who is making cupcakes to high growth, high VC organizations. So I would say most of the impediments early on actually came from existing economic development organizations. And even today, they probably are some of our greatest pains. But we got over that by essentially just putting our blinders on and working forward. It was a long process.
Any advice that you would give to others that are kind of just starting out?
What I would say is this is a long game. Ecosystems are sort of a 5-year rule, that it takes at least 5 years where you can see an ecosystem of almost there will not be any cupcakes at the summit. That entrepreneur did not work out for that entrepreneur. Reading the chat. Really, when you take a 5-year window at an activity instead of a 3-month or a 6-month lens, it actually changes what your goals and objectives are. So often we'll see someone who will try to ask for money or ask, when I would play this when I was in political office, just say, we are looking to do an entrepreneurial summit. We've never done this before. We need a minimum of $200,000 or we just can't do it. And that is the wrong approach. If you were to look at Starting Blocks approach in Capital Entrepreneurs, the preceding organization, it was, we will take $500 and we would love for you to be a sponsor and show up, city officials. And that later became a $55 million ask by the time it was all said and done. But that $55 million ask definitely was never imagined on day one, but it was imagined in year 8. So things take time, and like Madison is also a smaller community than Tulsa or Milwaukee, or even I wonder if Erie has a larger population than Madison, but I would assume the answer is yes. But Google could also answer that for me. But just to note that it's a long road ahead.
Yeah, and it's like it's helping them redefine the sort of paradigm, especially city officials, that they're used to working in. And so I think I really like that, Scott, about thinking about how long of a time sort of frame that you have to think of in order to really reach your end goal, because I think that's something that I face every day in my work too.
Oh yeah, and what I would also say is there is a food chain, and coming into this, realizing what that order is. So for example, at our state agency, we have someone who really wants to focus on ecosystem building, who is, a low level, essentially he is, the lowest level of an agent inside the state government. And he's worked there for 3 years. We've had conversations, but it only took to like us talking recently where he's shared the notion that my boss actually doesn't agree with ecosystem building, and I need to figure out ways to convince my boss of this. And his boss happens to be a really good friend of mine, and I didn't realize that he was actually running into that bottleneck inside a government agency. So understanding those problems, and now I'm coming up with I could come up with a 1-pager to try to convince your boss to let you do what you want to do. There's a lot of little things that you can do. I wish I had the greater Sacramento population or Tulsa's population, because Madison, I'm just reading the populations on the side here in the chat. But there are a lot of things you can do, but it's understanding what are the actual linchpins, even once you get down to communicate. Once communication is no longer that barrier.
Scott, to your point, we were having a discussion a couple of weeks back at the Governor's Economic Development Conference in Oklahoma. We had one panel on entrepreneurship, and it was great. But the conversation was something like those who are in charge of entrepreneurship and innovation in ED organizations, they are not in decision-making roles, which often is a big barrier. So I think that's something, yeah.
That is literally the exact barrier that I'm sharing. And because I get to look at the metrics committee for SEN with Cecilia and others, I get to look at all the other states, and Oklahoma has a long way. Again, any state can improve. Oklahoma has one of the, I could frame it as, a lot of room for improvement.
I agree.
Welcome to our world.
I would love to see that data. Is that public anywhere?
Yeah, or I can, I'll just share the slide in the chat. Someone else talk, and in 30 seconds it will be there.
So Laura, I think you've got some good experience in this space. Can you talk to us about that, your experiences?
Even though Sacramento is a big population, I think one of the problems that we have is there's so many things that economic development and city is focused on that sometimes entrepreneurship gets lost behind, homelessness or don't hate me, but I'm going to say diversity and inclusion, which is part of entrepreneurship. But a lot of times it's hard to raise just general entrepreneurship to people's awareness. So we don't have a we don't really have a region-wide entrepreneurship festival in Sacramento. There's some regular events that go on, but I would say the last few years that entrepreneurship as a way to growth of our economy has been getting more attention from the people I'll call suits and checkbooks. So I would say the last 3 to 5 years, we've seen some improvements in that. They still don't really know what's going on in the entrepreneurship community, and that's one reason why I wanted to join this group, because as much I kind of have a love-hate relationship with this goal. So, so I'm really interested in finding out ways. When we say universal, like I am thinking of it more like universal within every stakeholder in our community, and then how do we like build a model that works in Sacramento that will also work in other cities. And one of the things I want to get some support for is to create what I'll call a study mission of the entrepreneurial ecosystem in our community. That I get really angry that I get so angry that our Metro Chamber puts on this big study mission event where hundreds of people go to another city to see how they're doing things every year. And they come back and they say, oh, in Philadelphia, they have X number of co-working spaces, and they have this and that, all these entrepreneurship things. And I'm like, dude, we have that in Sacramento too. So I want to organize, and I think it would be helpful in other communities, something like what we would call here in Sacramento an internal study mission that's just focused on getting the people who aren't currently involved in the entrepreneurial ecosystem, but who need to be, to understand what's already going on in the community and how they can join and be a part of it. Was that what you asked me?
I had some technical difficulties and have just returned, so I missed probably half of what you said. I can listen to it on the recording later, so I'll let others jump in.
Yeah, I would just say there are many, there are several different techniques. I mean, that sounds like Madison 10 years ago. Just the story you just described, except, replace Philadelphia and put the city of Chicago. And you start to ask, business leaders like, yes, you just went to 1871. It was fantastic. We have different pieces that are in Madison that are just as compelling that you should also spend some time at. So I don't know if you're coming in for SEN, but I'd be happy to sit down over coffee and outline either startup crawls or how we've done it with a few other elected leaders, because we still are educating. Every time there's an electoral change, what we've realized is you may build a relationship with someone, and then when they're out of office, that relationship starts all over. And sometimes sometimes I'll say it's a blessing when your mayor leaves. Other times it's not so much. Right. So how do you continuously build relationships? And we now have sort of the formalized, all right, this is the event that we're going to do with our congressman or congresswoman, our U.S. senators, and I'd be happy to share that roadmap with you.
Yeah, that would be great, and I think that kind of information would benefit other communities as well. Like maybe we could even figure out what stage are people in. I don't know, create something like how aware are these people, and here's some ongoing things, like you said, that you should be doing every time there's an election or a change. And then, here's some other ways, like you can do a startup crawl and how to get them to go to it, that sort of thing.
Katie, do you think it would be effective if I share the planning document that you were on for the mayor's roundtable? I can share that with this group.
Yeah, sure. I mean,
Yes.
I think like a bigger, like if you have any other documentation around how you approach it, I think that would be really beneficial. Just to add on to what Scott and Laura were saying, like, I feel like the reason a lot of people don't know what's happening in their own community is because no one's paid to understand what's happening in their own community. They're only paid to understand what's happening in their lane. And that takes like a really progressive, and I don't mean that in a political way necessarily, but it takes like a very progressive, forward-thinking sort of organization and leadership to allow that person to understand what else is going on. And like, to me, that's at the heart of ecosystem building, is like first getting people to understand that it is beneficial to your bottom line, whatever that bottom line is, to understand the bigger network of what's impacting your community. So I think anything that, like, any resources along those lines would be really helpful. So I want to keep an eye on the time. We have about 5 minutes, just to be respectful of everyone's hour. Let me just toggle back to the agenda here. Oh yeah, Beth, our closing Q&A was, has anything on this call inspired anyone to act on something within the next 24 hours? So that could be joining one of the existing project teams. It could be connecting, on a separate event or anything like that. Oh, we lost Celia. Bye, Celia. But yeah, is there anything that folks are sort of excited about doing, just so we can sort of see the impact of these conversations?
This is Brian, Small Business Majority. We are, like I mentioned, we're a national organization, and we're happy to participate in the kind of the global or at least national public awareness campaign. Someone had mentioned, sending around some ideas to review to see how effective they are, and we can also help to push those out when the time comes through our network. So happy to be more involved in that effort.
Cool.
That's awesome. Thank you.
I think Beth is frozen, but I'm sure behind her frozen screen she's doing like a happy dance, because that's her favorite topic.
I am dancing.
Anyone else have any inspiration that they're thinking about?
I mean, there is one thing, and I actually don't know how to tackle it right now, but one is on some of the baseline materials that I think that we can simply share out from best practices from Madison. But the other one, which is how do we get to the larger stakeholders that really do play a role in all of our communities? Like, bankers have not figured out how to support entrepreneurship. Some of that is due to regulation. Others is due to just due to a number of factors that I have not figured out. How do we tackle that and the importance of awareness to that? It's just like a topic I am thinking about. I don't know what that next action looks like, but just a thought.
Scott, we should just pick a date and meet in the lunchroom.
If we only knew how to find each other.
I don't know where you are.
I'm actually at my Hardin office. I haven't moved into, but I will be on the 4th floor very soon.
Other thoughts? Other inspirations?
I would like to hear if people have had preconceived ideas or expectations about this call, if we met expectations, and if there's other ideas of content you would like to see. Obviously, now that this first call is over, soon Katie and I and others will be talking about what the next call will look like, and we'd really like it to be by you, for you.
Yeah, like if there's topics that we could find speakers on, or if you have some speaker ideas, like you've always wanted to hear X or Y person, we could try to invite them to something like this.
I was recently at the MAHA Discovery Conference in Omaha, and I heard a speaker from the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, the Office of Advocate for Small Business Capital Formation. But has anybody else, have you heard about her or spoken to her?
I don't think so.
Okay, well, I'm happy to share information about that presentation. This might connect and be a good speaker for future.
some of the speakers that I have. That sounds like a really interesting speaker. Is it Del Gaines from the Federal Reserve in Kansas City? That's someone totally different, but I'm blanking on if his name is actually that.
He's Del Gaines, but yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's awesome.
Yeah. I only get to see him on Twitter, not over conference calls, but I think he would add some interesting thoughts to the conversation. Also, Ian Hathaway, who's a researcher currently out of London, but is the Center for Entrepreneurship. He is working on just some of the more interesting pieces in entrepreneurship, is usually research on his front. And I can share his information.
Great.
I'd be interested in just, for example, for Scott doing, we talked about him sharing all this information on how they did this in Madison, but just to hear a talk on how you did it, the success that you've had in Madison. Of course, I'll probably hear a lot of that next week, but maybe. But, just success stories from other communities, I think would be interesting.
Yeah, two spots to see. And I mean, so Revolution came out with an interesting report last year on ecosystems where they had folks write a fair amount, like a couple pages on what's going on in their communities, and they profiled 10 communities out of that. The person who put together some of those reports may be interesting just because they get to see a lot of communities. And then also TechStars has put together a similar report that also profiles Madison, if you just want to read some of the tweets. And that will be coming out later this year.
Great. All right, Beth, anything else you wanted to cover?
I don't think so.
Great.
I
So
have a
thank you
question.
everyone for taking, oh yeah,
So as note taker, which I'm going to paste my notes into the sheet as soon as we're done here, but all of the chat comments, there's a lot of information in there. Is that going to somehow be included, or do I need to do something with that in the note?
I will copy and paste everything as well. And then I think Celia actually gets like a report out of all the chats from Zoom. So I'll see if that, we'll see if I'm able to do what I just promised to do. And then if not, I will follow up with Celia about it.
One more question about how many people said they were interested in being on this goal versus what we had 8 or 9 show up today. 9 or 8.
Beth, do you remember how many people were on that spreadsheet? I think
Yeah, so there's two data points for that information. There's people that actually registered for the call, and those are calls that people could have registered a year and a half or 2 ago, whenever we first started, up till just after this past most recent ESHIP summit and all the emails that have come out, and that number is 19. But also, there are more people that signed up interested in Goal 6 that may not have, for whatever reason, registered for these calls. And that information will be coming out in that email, I believe, that Celia promised for the end of this week or early next.
That's right. This is about typical for, I think there's like between 8 to 15 people on these calls so far. So. Our next meeting of this meetup is October 14th at noon Central. And Celia will be sending out a calendar invite and all of that if she hasn't already. And in the meantime, we'll use some of your suggestions that Beth solicited to see if we can put something fun together for that meeting.
Yeah, and feel free to reach out on Slack or the Facebook page, probably the Slack under Goal 6, with any other ideas you might have for subject matter for the following future calls.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, everyone. Nice to see you. Meet you.
Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye.